Picture this. You're Emma Stone, one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, fresh off an Oscar win for Poor Things, and your director hands you a script where you get kidnapped, stripped naked, covered in lotion, have your head shaved, chained to a basement floor, tortured with electricity, and ultimately revealed as an alien queen who genocides the entire human race. Your response? Sign me up. That's Bugonia in a nutshell, Yorgos Lanthimos' 2025 black comedy thriller that takes the already unhinged 2003 South Korean cult film Save the Green Planet and cranks the absurdity dial to 11. Released theatrically on October 24, 2025, before hitting VOD in November and Peacock in December, this 55 million co-production between the UK, Ireland, South Korea, and the United States grossed roughly 33 million worldwide. Not exactly a box office smash, but commercially, that was never the point. This is a film that premiered at the Venice International Film Festival, scored an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, and immediately divided audiences into camps, those who embraced its tonal chaos and those who felt like they'd been emotionally waterboarded for 11 minutes. Lanthimos has built his career on discomfort, Dogtooth, The Lobster, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Favorite, Poor Things. Every single one operates in a space where human behavior gets dissected like a high school frog, exposing the grotesque mechanics underneath. But Bugonia represents something different in his filmography. It's his first adaptation of existing material that isn't a period piece or a speculative universe he built from scratch. This is America, 2025, recognizable and contemporary, which makes its savagery land differently. When you set your apocalyptic satire in a world that looks exactly like the one outside your window, every punch hits closer to the bone. The original Save the Green Planet flew under most Western radars when it dropped in 2003. But in South Korea, it achieved cult status for its genre-blending audacity, part kidnapping thriller, part science fiction, part slapstick comedy, part environmental tragedy. Director Jang Joon-hwan crafted a film that refused to stay in one lane, tonally whiplashing viewers between laugh-out-loud absurdity and soul-crushing despair. The film follows a man convinced that aliens are destroying Earth, so he kidnaps a corporate executive he believes to be an extraterrestrial. Sound familiar? Development on the English language remake began back in 2020 with Jang himself attached to direct and Will Tracy, The Menu, Succession adapting the screenplay. Producer Ari Aster. Yes, the guy who made Hereditary and Midsommar was on board from the jump, which should have been the first clue that this wasn't going to be a straightforward Hollywood remake. Aster's involvement signaled intent. This would retain the original's tonal fearlessness, its willingness to make audiences laugh and then immediately gut-punch them with existential horror. But then Jang stepped down as director in late 2023, citing health problems. Losing the original visionary could have derailed the entire project. Instead, in February 2024, Yorgos Lanthimos signed on to replace him. And here's the thing, this wasn't a random hire. Jang himself expressed excitement about the choice, calling Lanthimos very fitting for the material. And he's absolutely right. If anyone could take a Korean cult film about conspiracy theories, corporate greed, and alien apocalypse and make it sing in English, it's the Greek director who spent the last decade making Emma Stone eat questionable pastries and dance with dead babies. Lanthimos brought his entire creative team with him. Robbie Ryan, his cinematographer since The Favorite, returned to shoot Bugonia on 35mm film in VistaVision format, giving the film a textural richness that contrasts beautifully with its grimy, claustrophobic basement setting. Yorgos Mavrovsaridis, who's edited nearly every Lanthimos film since Dogtooth, handled cutting duties, ensuring the film's tonal shifts felt intentional rather than chaotic. Justin Fendrix, the experimental composer who scored Poor Things, contributed a soundscape that oscillates between eerie minimalism and outright cacophony. And Emma Stone? She's not just a star, she's a producer, having formed a creative partnership with Lanthimos that's already yielded 2 Oscars and counting. Stone's involvement as producer is crucial to understanding Bugonia's existence. After the critical and commercial success of Poor Things, which earned her a second Best Actress Oscar, she had the industry capital to greenlight basically whatever she wanted. She chose this, a film where she plays a pharmaceutical CEO who may or may not be an alien, plotting humanity's extinction. That decision tells you everything about her creative instincts. She's not chasing safe, crowd-pleasing material. She's chasing weird. Jesse Plemons, playing conspiracy theorist and beekeeper Teddy Gatz, represents another inspired casting choice. Plemons has become Hollywood's go-to guy for portraying barely contained rage simmering beneath a deceptively calm exterior. From Breaking Bad to The Power of the Dog to Killers of the Flower Moon, he specializes in characters whose politeness masks something deeply broken. Teddy Gatz might be his most unhinged role yet, a man so consumed by paranoia and grief that he kidnaps, tortures, and ultimately murders his way toward what he believes is truth. Lemons doesn't play him as a villain. He plays him as a true believer, which is infinitely more disturbing. Rounding out the core trio is Aidan Delbis as Don or Donnie, depending on the source, Teddy's autistic cousin and accomplice. This is Delbis's first major film role, and it's a tricky one. Playing a character with autism in a dark comedy requires an actor who can balance vulnerability with agency, avoiding both caricature and pity. Early reviews suggest Delbis pulls it off, though the character's ultimate fate, spoiler, he dies, has sparked some debate about whether the film handles his arc with sufficient care or simply uses his disability as tragic window dressing. Alicia Silverstone appears in a smaller but pivotal role as Sandy, Teddy's mother, whose comatose state, caused by a pharmaceutical trial gone wrong, serves as the inciting incident for the entire plot. Silverstone, best known for Clueless and 90s rom-coms, has spent recent years gravitating toward darker, more complex material. Her presence here, largely confined to a hospital bed, functions as a silent rebuke to corporate malfeasance, a living, barely reminder of what happens when profit overrides human welfare. The supporting cast includes Stavros Halkias, a stand-up comedian making his dramatic debut in a role that hasn't been widely detailed in promotional materials, but reportedly involves law enforcement. Casting a comedian in a Lanthimos film is a calculated move. Comedians understand timing, understand how to land a punchline, and Lanthimos' films are, in their own twisted way, exercises in comedic timing. The humor just happens to be punctuated by violence and existential dread. Production took place primarily in the UK and Ireland, leveraging tax incentives that brought the effective budget down from the reported 55 million, a figure some sources contest as inflated. For context, Lanthimos' previous film Poor Things cost around 35 million, so Bugonia represents a budget increase, though still modest by Hollywood sci-fi standards. That money went toward practical effects, location shooting, and a cast full of above-the-line talent, not CGI spectacle. This is a film where the alien technology is largely suggested through production design and lighting rather than expensive visual effects, keeping the focus squarely on performance and atmosphere. The decision to shoot on 35mm film in VistaVision, a widescreen format developed by Paramount in the 1950s, signals Lanthimos' commitment to analog texture. Digital cinema offers convenience and flexibility, but film grain has a tactile quality, a sense of physical presence that suits Bugonia's themes. This is a movie about bodies, bodies in pain, bodies as evidence, bodies as vessels for something other than human consciousness. Shooting on film emphasizes the material reality of those bodies, grounds them in something tangible rather than pixels. So, what's Bugonia actually about? On the surface, it's a kidnapping thriller. Two conspiracy theorists abduct a pharmaceutical CEO, convinced she's an alien. Dig deeper, and it's a scathing critique of late-stage capitalism, environmental collapse, and the epistemological nightmare of living in a post-truth world where conspiracy theories and corporate press releases are equally unreliable. Dig even deeper, and it's a tragicomic meditation on grief, agency, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a senseless world. The title itself, Bugonia, comes from an ancient Greek ritual, a form of spontaneous generation where bees were believed to emerge from the carcasses of sacrificed bulls. Life from death, sweetness from rot, its mythology, pseudoscience, and metaphor all at once. Teddy is a beekeeper, and the film's final image involves bees returning to his apiary after humanity's extinction, which makes the title both literal and symbolic. The film suggests that humanity's death might be the necessary sacrifice for Earth's rebirth, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we unpack the ending, and oh, we will unpack that ending, we need to walk through how Bugonia constructs its nightmare. We need to talk about the abduction, the basement, the interrogation, the dinner party from hell, the hospital tragedy, and the reveal that upends everything. We need to examine how Lanthimos shoots it, how Plemons and Stone perform it, and what it all means in a cultural moment where conspiracy theories have body counts and pharmaceutical companies have PR budgets larger than some nations' GDPs. This isn't a film that holds your hand. Lanthimos never does. His movies demand active engagement, ask you to sit with discomfort, refuse easy catharsis. Bugonia takes that philosophy and applies it to genre filmmaking, resulting in something that feels simultaneously like a thriller, a comedy, a horror film, and a tragedy, often within the same scene. It's a tonal high wire act, and whether it works for you will depend entirely on your tolerance for ambiguity and your appetite for bleakness. One thing certain, it's unlike anything else released in 2025. In a year dominated by franchise filmmaking and algorithmic content, Bugonia arrives as a genuine anomaly. A big budget film that actively antagonizes mainstream expectations, that refuses to resolve its contradictions neatly, that asks, what if the conspiracy theorist is right but also a murderer? What if the corporate villain is actually an alien but also sympathetic? What if everyone's wrong and right simultaneously? And it doesn't matter because we're all doomed anyway. Welcome to Bugonia. It's going to be a ride. The film opens not with action but with stillness. Michelle Fuller sits in her pristine office, high above some unnamed American city, surrounded by glass and steel and the trappings of corporate power. Emma Stone plays her with a controlled calm that immediately registers as uncanny. There's something too composed about her, too measured. She speaks in the flat, affectless cadence that's become Lanthimos' signature. Every word carefully selected, no emotion wasted. She's reviewing pharmaceutical data, profit margins, clinical trial results, standard CEO stuff, except the camera lingers on her face just a beat too long, and Robbie Ryan's cinematography captures something in her eyes, not warmth, exactly. Calculation? Or something else entirely? Cut to Teddy Gatz, and the contrast couldn't be sharper. Jesse Plemons first appears in his beekeeper suit, tending to his hives with the gentle precision of someone who trusts insects more than people. His face is all soft edges and gentle concern as he checks the honeycombs, but you can feel the tension coiled underneath. The film establishes immediately that Teddy lives in a different world than Michelle, literally and figuratively, where her environment is controlled, sanitized, artificial. His is organic, messy, alive. He talks to his bees. They don't talk back, but he listens anyway. The exposition comes through Teddy's interactions with Dawn, his cousin. Aidan Delbis plays Dawn with a literalness that grounds the film's more outlandish elements. When Teddy explains his theory that pharmaceutical executives are actually aliens from the planet Andromeda, sent to Earth to weaken humanity through poisonous drugs, paving the way for invasion, Don doesn't laugh or dismiss it. He processes it seriously, methodically. Do you have evidence? He asks. Teddy shows him newspaper clippings, internet printouts, photographs of Michelle at various pharmaceutical conferences, red string connecting dots that maybe shouldn't be connected, or maybe should. Here's where the film does something clever. It doesn't mock Teddy. Not yet. Lanthimos shoots his conspiracy wall with the same visual respect he'd give a detective's investigation board. The connections Teddy's made, linking pharmaceutical trials to increased cancer rates, tracing Michelle's career trajectory through multiple companies that all faced class action lawsuits, documenting strange lights in the sky near pharma labs. They are not presented as the ravings of a madman. They are presented as research. Obsessive. Yes. Paranoid, definitely. But not baseless. The abduction itself unfolds with workmanlike efficiency. Teddy and Dawn don't burst in with guns blazing. They plan, they surveil, they wait for the right moment. Michelle's routine includes late nights at the office, and her security detail has a predictable rotation. On a Thursday evening, when she leaves through the parking garage, they strike. Teddy hits her with a taser, a prolonged, brutal shot that drops her instantly. No dramatic fight scene, no clever quips, just voltage and collapse. What follows is deeply uncomfortable. They strip her unconscious body, not sexually, but clinically, methodically. Because, as Teddy explains to Dawn, they can hide tracking devices in clothing. They wrap her in plastic sheeting. They load her into a van. Stone's body is treated as an object, a problem to be solved, and the camera doesn't flinch. This isn't Taken. This isn't a fantasy where the victim fights back with martial arts. This is just kidnapping, shot with documentary-like detachment. The drive to Terry's property takes them out of the city and into rural nowhere. The landscape shifts from urban sprawl to farmland to isolated woods. The film doesn't score this sequence with ominous music. Instead, we get the sound of tires on asphalt, Don's nervous breathing, Teddy's mumbled reassurances to himself. "We are doing the right thing. We have to do this. No one else will," is the mantra of every terrorist, every vigilante, every person who's ever justified violence in the name of a greater good. The basement where they take Michelle is the film's primary location for the next 40 minutes of runtime, and production designer James Price deserves recognition for creating a space that's simultaneously mundane and nightmarish. It's not a torture dungeon from a horror movie. It's a converted root cellar in a farmhouse with exposed pipes, a concrete floor, a single light bulb, and walls covered in more of Teddy's research. Michelle wakes chained to a metal pole, naked except for a thin blanket. The first thing she sees is Teddy, sitting calmly in a chair, holding a clipboard like he is conducting a job interview. "Michelle Fuller," he begins, reading from his notes. Age 44, CEO of Pharmex Industries, graduated Harvard Business School 2004, board member of 7 pharmaceutical companies, net worth estimated at 300 million, and he looks up, meeting her eyes, not human. Stone's reaction is perfect. Not outrage, not fear, confusion, genuine, uncomprehending confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" she says, and her delivery is so flat, so devoid of panic, that it reads as either shock or something else. The film hoards the ambiguity. Is she too stunned to process this, or is she calculating her next move with alien precision? Teddy lays out his case. He believes Michelle is part of an extraterrestrial species called the Andromedans, who've been infiltrating Earth for decades through corporate positions, specifically targeting industries that affect human health and longevity. Pharmaceuticals are their primary vector. They create drugs that claim to treat diseases but actually cause them, weakening the human immune system, shortening lifespans, preparing Earth for colonization. He's been tracking her for 3 years. He has proof. And here's where Jesse Plemons does something remarkable. He delivers this insane conspiracy theory with absolute conviction, but also with vulnerability. His voice cracks when he mentions his mother, Sandy, who's in a coma after participating in a clinical trial for one of Pharmex's drugs. "She trusted you," he says, "and the pain is real, raw, undeniable. She thought she was helping medical research. Instead, you poisoned her." Michelle's response: "I don't know what you're talking about." Flat, emotionless. No defensive anger, no desperate pleading, just nothing. Which, of course, makes Teddy more certain he's right. Because what human wouldn't react with fear in this situation? The lack of expected emotional response becomes evidence of non-humanity. Don watches from the corner, uncomfortable. He believed Teddy's theory in the abstract, but seeing a naked woman chained in a basement forces him to confront the reality. "Maybe we should give her clothes," he suggests. Teddy agrees, but only after checking every seam, every fiber, for hidden technology. The indignity is the point. Strip away the trappings of power, the expensive suits, the executive presence, and what's left? Teddy wants to see what's underneath the Michelle Fuller persona. Human or something else? The interrogation that follows isn't enhanced by torture, not immediately. Teddy starts with questions. Where is she from? What is her mission? How many others are there? Michelle maintains her confusion, her denial, her insistence that she's human, that she's an American citizen, that this is all a terrible mistake. But Lanthimos shoots these exchanges like a therapy session, the camera moving between their faces with the patience of someone watching a psychological chess match. Teddy pulls out photographs. Sandy in her hospital bed, tubes and monitors keeping her technically alive. "This is what your drugs did," he says. Michelle looks at the photo for a long moment, and then she says something that shifts the entire dynamic. "I'm sorry for your mother. Clinical trials carry risks. She signed a consent form, but that doesn't make me an alien." The legal speak, the corporate liability dodge. It's tone deaf in this context, almost hilariously inappropriate. But is it tone deaf because Michelle's a disconnected CEO who's genuinely human but monstrous through capitalism? Or because she's an alien who doesn't understand human emotional norms? The film refuses to clarify. Both readings work simultaneously. Dawn asks the question. The audience is thinking, how do we know if she's telling the truth? Teddy has an answer. He pulls out a device, homemade, cobbled together from electrical components and copper wire, that he claims can detect non-human electromagnetic frequencies. It looks like something from a 1950s B movie, which is kind of the point. He waves it over Michelle's body. It beeps erratically. See? He says triumphantly. Dawn looks skeptical. That could mean anything. Interference, the pipes, her heart rate. But Teddy is not listening anymore. The device confirmed what he already believed. Confirmation bias in action. The film lets you see the logical fallacy in real time, but it doesn't lecture you about it. It just shows you a man so desperate for his pain to have meaning that he'll interpret ambiguous evidence as proof. Michelle tries a different approach. She speaks directly to Don, recognizing him as the weaker link. You seem like a good person, she says gently. You don't want to hurt anyone. This is kidnapping. This is assault. Let me go and I won't press charges. You can walk away from this. It's a reasonable offer. Logical, but Don shakes his head. Teddy's family, he says simply. I believe him. That loyalty, irrational, unwavering, is what makes Don tragic. He's not a true believer in the alien conspiracy. He's a believer in Teddy, and that's enough for him to participate in something horrific. The first act accelerates when Teddy escalates to physical methods. He attaches electrodes to Michelle's temples, not to torture, he insists, but to disrupt the Andromedan neural frequency that allows her to maintain human appearance. It's pseudoscience dressed up as procedure, but Plemons plays it with such earnest conviction that you almost forget how insane it is. He flips the switch. Michelle convulses. Stone's body arches against the restraints, and the camera doesn't cut away. We watch the full duration of her pain, and then it stops. She's panting, sweating, shaking, but still human in appearance. Teddy looks confused. The frequency must be wrong, he mutters, adjusting dials. Dawn intervenes. Maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe she's human. Teddy rounds on him with sudden fury. Don't, he snaps. Don't let her get in your head. That's what they do. They manipulate. They make you doubt. This is the moment the film reveals its true horror. Not the alien invasion, not the corporate evil. The horror of certainty. The inability to be wrong. Teddy has built his entire identity around this theory, and to abandon it now would mean confronting the possibility that he's simply a man who kidnapped and tortured an innocent person because he couldn't accept that his mother's tragedy was random, senseless, just bad luck. Michelle sees the opening. I didn't want your mother to get hurt, she says quietly, and for the first time, there's something that might be genuine emotion in her voice. Pharmaceutical development involves risk. We try to minimize it, but we can't eliminate it. I'm truly sorry she was one of the cases that went wrong, but that doesn't make me a monster. It makes me a person running a business that operates within legal parameters. It's the worst possible thing she could say, because she's not denying the harm, she's justifying it, legalizing it. And in that moment, whether Michelle is human or alien becomes almost irrelevant to Teddy. Because either way, she represents a system that values profit over life, that hides behind consent forms and liability waivers, that can destroy someone's mother and call it an acceptable loss. The scene ends with Teddy walking upstairs, leaving Michelle chained in the darkness. Dawn follows, uncertain, and the film holds on Stone's face for a long, uncomfortable moment. Alone now, unobserved, does her expression change? Does something flicker behind her eyes? Fear, calculation, or something inhuman? Lanthimos doesn't give you a clear answer. The ambiguity is intentional. You are supposed to be as uncertain as Dawn, as desperate for clarity as Teddy. Upstairs, Teddy sits at his kitchen table, surrounded by evidence that suddenly feels less convincing. Dawn makes tea, an oddly domestic gesture that highlights the absurdity. What if we are wrong? Dawn asks again. Teddy doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is small, broken. We can't be wrong, because if we are wrong, I've done something unforgivable. And that's the trap. The deeper Teddy goes, the more impossible it becomes to turn back. Admitting error now means admitting monstrousness. So the only path forward is to keep believing, keep searching for proof, keep justifying the unjustifiable. It's the psychology of every conspiracy theorist, every cult member, every person who's ever sacrificed morality on the altar of being right. The abduction is complete. The premise is established. Michelle is captive. Teddy is committed. Dawn is complicit. What happens next will test every assumption, shatter every expectation, and ultimately reveal that everyone was right and wrong in ways they couldn't possibly predict. Day 2 in the basement brings a shift in power dynamics. Michelle has stopped denying. Not because she's admitted to being an alien, she hasn't, but because she's recognized that denial doesn't work on someone like Teddy. Instead, she starts asking questions. What happens if you're right, she says, when he comes down with breakfast? Eggs, toast, orange juice, surprisingly considerate for a kidnapper. Let's say I am what you think I am. What then? You've captured one alleged alien. There are supposedly thousands of us. What's your endgame? It's a fair question, and Teddy doesn't have a good answer. His planning stopped at the abduction. Expose her somehow? Force a confession and upload it to the internet? Kill her and perform an autopsy to prove non-human anatomy? He's winging it and Michelle can sense it. She stopped acting like a victim. Now she's acting like someone in a negotiation. Stone shifts her body language subtly, less cowering, more observation. She's studying her captors with the same analytical precision she probably applies to quarterly earnings reports. Don notices. She's different today, he tells Teddy when they're alone upstairs. Calmer, like she's not scared anymore. Teddy interprets this as more evidence of alien nature. No human would adapt this quickly to captivity. But there's another reading. Michelle has simply accepted her situation and is now looking for leverage. That's not alien behavior. That's executive behavior. That's survivor behavior. The basement becomes a strange kind of liminal space, almost domestic in its routine. Teddy brings meals. Dawn empties the bucket that serves as Michelle's toilet. A degrading detail the film doesn't shy away from. They've given her a cot to sleep on, a blanket, basic dignities. It's not humane, exactly, but it's not a horror film dungeon either. It's more disturbing for its ordinariness. This could be any basement anywhere. These could be anyone's neighbors. Michelle starts telling stories about her childhood in Ohio, about her father who worked in a steel mill before the plant closed, about putting herself through college with student loans she only finished paying off in her 30s. I'm not some alien infiltrator, she says. I'm the American dream, for better or worse. I clawed my way up from nothing, and yes, I made compromises. I worked for companies that prioritize profit over people. But that's not extraterrestrial conspiracy, that's just capitalism. And here's where the film gets intellectually interesting. Because she's right. The conspiracy theory is unnecessary to explain pharmaceutical malfeasance. Humans are perfectly capable of poisoning each other for money without alien intervention. Teddy's theory actually lets corporations off the hook by attributing their evil to otherworldly influence rather than simple greed. But Teddy counters with his own stories. He talks about growing up in this house, his mother's kindness, how she volunteered at the library and baked cookies for neighbors and never hurt anyone in her entire life, how she developed early onset Alzheimer's, and how the Pharmex drug trial promised hope, a chance to slow cognitive decline, to preserve her mind for a few more years, how she signed up voluntarily, enthusiastically, how the drug didn't slow anything, how it accelerated her decline, shutting down her brain function so rapidly that within 6 months she was comatose and the doctors said she'd never wake up. They paid us 30,000, Teddy says, his voice cracking. $30,000 for my mother's life, and the consent form said we couldn't sue, that we accepted all risk, so I researched. I looked into Pharmex's history, your history, and I found patterns. Drugs that hurt more than they help, trials that bury negative results, executives who get bonuses while patients get body bags. And I thought, what kind of species does this to itself? What kind of human predators on their own kind so efficiently? And that's when I started considering other explanations. It's the most human Teddy has been, and Plemons delivers it with devastating sincerity. You understand completely why he's here, why he's done this. It doesn't justify it. Kidnapping and torture are never justified, but you understand it. The film doesn't ask you to sympathize with Teddy, exactly, but it asks you to recognize his pain as real, his logic as tragically understandable. Michelle listens. For a long time, she doesn't respond. When she does, her voice is quieter than before. I'm sorry about your mother, genuinely. But people die in clinical trials. That's the nature of experimental medicine. We try to save more people than we hurt, but we don't always succeed. I know that sounds cold. Maybe it is cold. Maybe you have to be cold to run these companies, because if you felt every death personally, you'd never approve another trial, and then nobody gets saved. Or maybe, Teddy says, you're a species that doesn't feel empathy the way humans do. Maybe that coldness isn't a survival mechanism. Maybe it's your nature, stalemate, two worldviews, fundamentally incompatible, and the basement becomes a pressure cooker where neither can escape the other's presence. Dawn starts cracking. He's not built for this kind of sustained tension. He paces, he fidgets, he checks his phone compulsively, even though Teddy made him turn off location services. He's particularly bothered by the physical intimacy of captivity, having to see Michelle in various states of undress, having to handle her waist, having to touch her when repositioning chains. It's too close, too human, or not human enough, depending on what she is. Michelle picks up on his discomfort and exploits it. Not sexually. This isn't that kind of thriller, but psychologically. She asks about his life, where he works, a grocery store, what he likes to do, video games mostly. Whether he's happy, he doesn't know how to answer that. She treats him like a person with genuine curiosity, and it works better than any escape attempt could. Because Dawn starts seeing her as a person too, or at least something that acts person like enough that the distinction stops mattering. Do you really believe I'm an alien? She asks him when Teddy's upstairs sleeping. It's the middle of the night or early morning. The film loses track of time in the basement's artificial light. Dawn considers the question carefully. I believe Teddy believes it, he finally says. And Teddy's smarter than me. He researches things. He understands things I don't. So probably yes. But you spent days with me now, Michelle presses. Do I seem alien to you? I don't know what an alien would seem like, Dawn admits. That's the problem. If you're good at pretending to be human, I wouldn't be able to tell. So the fact that you seem human doesn't prove anything. It's a more sophisticated epistemological point than Dawn probably realizes he's making. How do you verify humanity? What constitutes proof? If something walks like a duck and talks like a duck but insists it's a swan, how do you know who's lying? The duck or your own perception? The dynamic shifts again when Teddy introduces a new element, the dinner guest. He announces that someone is coming to visit, someone who needs to see what they've accomplished, someone who will understand the importance of their work. Dawn is surprised. This wasn't part of the plan. Michelle is alert, calculating. A guest means potential rescue, potential intervention, potential chaos. The guest arrives on day 3. Her name is Casey, Teddy's ex-girlfriend from college, a freelance journalist who writes for conspiracy-adjacent websites, the kind of digital publications that sit uncomfortably between investigative journalism and paranoid fantasy. Teddy has stayed in touch with her over the years, sharing his research, hoping she'd help expose the pharmaceutical alien connection. She's been skeptical but interested. Now he's offering her exclusive access to proof. Casey comes to dinner literally. Teddy has prepared an elaborate meal, roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and set the table for 4. Michelle is brought upstairs, chained but clothed, seated at the dinner table like a grotesque parody of normalcy. The scene is pure Lanthimos. Formal dinner party aesthetics applied to a hostage situation, everyone pretending at civility while violence simmers underneath. Casey looks uncomfortable. She's younger than Michelle, maybe early 30s, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, journalist casual. She keeps glancing at Michelle, then at Teddy, trying to reconcile her friend's conspiracy theories with the reality of a kidnapped woman. So, she says finally, you actually did it. You really believe she's not human? I don't believe, Teddy corrects. I know. Casey asks Michelle direct questions. Are you being held against your will? Yes. Have they hurt you? Yes. Have they hurt you? Yes. Are you? Do you claim to be from Earth? Obviously, the interview is surreal, absurd, and Casey knows it. She's a journalist, which means she's trained to skepticism, to verification, to evidence. And sitting across from her is not evidence of alien life. Sitting across from her is a felony in progress. But Casey also knows Teddy. She knows his pain, his loss, his desperation. And she's seen enough corporate malfeasance in her reporting to understand why someone might reach for extraordinary explanations. Teddy, she says carefully, even if pharmaceutical companies are doing terrible things, and they are, that doesn't mean aliens. It just means humans are capable of terrible things. Teddy becomes agitated. You're not listening. You're not looking at the evidence, the patterns, the lights, the electromagnetic readings. He's pleading now, desperate for someone outside his echo chamber to validate him. But Casey shakes her head. What I'm looking at is kidnapping. What I'm looking at is a crime, and I can't be part of this. She gets up to leave. Teddy blocks the door. You can't tell anyone. You promised. Casey's expression hardens. I didn't promise to participate in abduction. Let me leave, or I call the police. Dawn looks panicked. Michelle watches, silent, strategic. And then something happens that changes everything. Michelle speaks. Wait, she says. Casey pauses. Let her examine me. I'll submit to whatever test she wants. If it'll prove I'm human and end this, I'll cooperate. It's a gamble. But Michelle has read the room correctly. Casey represents potential intervention, potential exposure. If Casey leaves and calls the police, Teddy will be arrested, yes. But Michelle might not survive the aftermath. Desperate people do desperate things. Better to use Casey's journalistic instincts, her desire for truth to create an off-ramp. Teddy agrees. Casey reluctantly stays. And the film's second act escalates into something even stranger. An impromptu scientific examination conducted by a journalist and two conspiracy theorists on a kidnapped CEO in a rural farmhouse using equipment ordered from Amazon and medical textbooks pulled from public libraries. The examination becomes a darkly comic interlude, absurd in its execution but played completely straight by all involved. Casey pulls out her phone and starts Googling how to identify alien physiology, a sentence that sounds ridiculous until you remember this is the logical endpoint of living in a world where internet searches replace expertise. She finds articles about blood pH levels, body temperature variations, eye reflex responses. All pseudoscience, but presented with enough medical jargon to sound plausible. Michelle submits to it all with weary resignation. Temperature check 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit, normal human range. Pulse 72 beats per minute, steady and unremarkable. Pupil dilation in response to light, exactly as expected. Casey checks Michelle's skin for unusual markings, examines her fingernails for abnormal growth patterns, even measures the space between her eyes using a ruler. Alien-human hybrids supposedly have slightly wider set eyes, according to one website. Every test comes back human. Boringly, disappointingly human. Teddy grows increasingly frustrated. They are mimicking human biology. That's the whole point. They've evolved to be undetectable. Casey pinches the bridge of her nose. Teddy, if they are undetectable, then what's the point of testing? You've created an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Anything that confirms your theory is proof. Anything that contradicts it is just better alien disguise. But Teddy has one more test. He leaves the room and returns with a small vial of clear liquid. Dimethyltryptamine, he announces. DMT. A powerful hallucinogen that supposedly allows humans to perceive other dimensions, other realities. If she's masking her true form with some kind of psychic projection, this should disrupt it. For us, it'll just be a trip. For her, it'll reveal what she really is. It's an escalation from pseudoscience to actual psychedelics, and everyone recognizes the danger. Casey immediately objects. That's drugging someone against their will. That's another felony. I can't watch this. Dawn looks similarly uncomfortable. Michelle's face remains neutral, but her body language shifts. This worries her in a way the previous test didn't. You said you'd cooperate, Teddy reminds her. This is cooperation. Michelle considers. She could refuse, but that plays into Teddy's narrative. Why would a human refuse a test that proves humanity? The trap has closed. Fine, she says quietly. But you take it too. All of us. If we are testing whether drugs affect me differently, then we need a control group. You, me, Casey, Dawn. We all take the same dose. Teddy didn't expect this, but he can't back down now without looking afraid. Casey protests. She's not taking hallucinogens in a house with a kidnapping victim and two unstable conspiracists. But Michelle makes a compelling argument. If everyone's equally compromised, equally vulnerable, then no one has power advantage. It's safer for everyone. And if I really am human, then we'll all just have a weird, terrible trip and maybe afterward, Teddy will accept reality. Don surprises everyone by agreeing. I'll do it, he says. If it helps prove things one way or another. His loyalty to Teddy warring with his growing doubts, and this feels like a way to resolve the cognitive dissonance. Casey, cornered by logic and morbid journalistic curiosity, reluctantly agrees. What follows is the film's most audacious sequence, a 20-minute psychedelic nightmare that pushes Lanthimos' formal experimentation to its limit. All four characters dose simultaneously. The DMT hits fast, within minutes, and the film's visual language fractures. Robbie Ryan's cinematography goes haywire in controlled ways. The 35mm film grain becomes more pronounced, almost tactile. Colors shift. The basement's dingy walls begin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The editing, courtesy of Yorgos Lanthimos, abandons conventional continuity. We get jump cuts, overlapping dialogue, temporal loops where the same moment repeats from different perspectives. From Teddy's POV, Michelle begins to change. Her skin takes on a translucent quality. Her eyes grow larger, darker. Her movements become insect-like, precise and alien. He sees what he's always believed he'd see, the monster revealed. Jesse Plemons plays terror and vindication simultaneously, his face cycling through emotions faster than rationality can process. From Casey's POV, the entire situation becomes crystallized in its horror. She sees herself as complicit, as having crossed a line from observer to participant. The walls of the basement seem to close in, covered in newspaper clippings that all scream journalist imprisoned for kidnapping. Her career, her ethics, her self image, all dissolving. She starts crying, then laughing, unable to distinguish between the two. From Dawn's POV, everyone becomes transparent. He can see their skeletons, their organs, the biological machinery that keeps them alive. And they all look the same: human bones, human hearts, human fear. If Michelle is an alien, her skeleton doesn't know it. This should be comforting. Instead, it's terrifying. If you can't trust your perceptions, what can you trust? From Michelle's POV, and this is crucial, everything remains mostly clear. She's experiencing the drug's effects, yes, visual distortions, temporal disorientation. But her cognition stays sharp, focused. She watches the other three descend into complete dissociation, and something crosses her face. Not fear anymore. Something else. Control, or the realization that control is possible. The trip peaks when Teddy lunges at Michelle, convinced he's seeing her true form, shouting, "I knew it. I knew it." He's reaching for her throat, and this is where the scene could turn lethal. But Don intercepts, his larger frame tackling Teddy away. They crash into Casey, who's curled on the floor, limbs tangle, voices overlap, and Michelle, still chained but mobile enough within her restraints, manages to grab Casey's phone. Time does something strange. The film suggests hours pass, but the clock shows only 30 minutes. The empty trips are notoriously brief but feel eternal. When the drug finally releases its hold, all four participants are scattered across the basement floor, exhausted and traumatized. Casey is rocking back and forth, muttering about ethics violations. Don is staring at his hands like they belong to someone else. Teddy is weeping, though whether from revelation or disappointment isn't clear. And Michelle is still chained, still calm, still watching. She has hidden Casey's phone in the blanket folds, but none of them are coherent enough to notice. The aftermath brings a new dynamic. Casey demands to leave immediately, and this time Teddy doesn't resist. He is too drained, too fractured by what he saw, or didn't see, or imagined he saw. Casey stumbles upstairs and out the door, and the film doesn't follow her. We don't know if she'll call the police, if she'll write the story, if she'll simply disappear and try to forget this ever happened. She's a loose end, untied deliberately. Left alone with his captive and his cousin, Teddy must confront the possibility that the trip proved nothing except that drugs make you hallucinate. "I saw you change," he tells Michelle. "I saw your real form." She meets his eyes steadily. "You saw what you wanted to see." That's how confirmation bias works. That's how this all works. But she says it without triumph, almost with pity. And that pity enrages Teddy more than mockery would. He doesn't want compassion from his enemy. He wants validation, wants his suffering to mean something more than just bad luck and corporate indifference. That night, Teddy goes to visit his mother. The hospital is 40 minutes away, and the film finally leaves the claustrophobic confines of the farmhouse. We see Sandy for the first time, Alicia Silverstone lying in a sterile bed, machines breathing for her, monitors tracking functions her brain can no longer control. She looks peaceful, which makes it worse somehow. There's no struggle, no apparent suffering, just absence. Teddy sits beside her and talks. About Michelle, about the abduction, about his certainty and his doubt. "I don't know what's real anymore, Mom," he admits. "I thought I was saving the world. Now I think maybe I'm just broken. Maybe I couldn't accept that you got hurt for no reason, so I invented a reason, made it cosmic, made it mean something." It's the first time Teddy has voiced doubt without someone forcing it, and it breaks him. He lays his head on the bed rail and sobs, and Plemons plays it without any vanity, just raw grief. A man confronting the possibility that he's done unforgivable things based on a lie he told himself. Back at the farmhouse, Don sits across from Michelle, who's been moved to the kitchen, still chained, but Teddy's grip on protocol is loosening. They eat leftover chicken in silence for a while. Then Don asks the question that's been building. "Are you going to have us arrested when this ends?" Michelle doesn't answer immediately. "I should," she finally says. "What you've done is criminal. But I'm thinking about what happens next. If I go to the police, Teddy goes to prison. You probably go to prison. There's a trial, media attention, scrutiny. My company gets investigated. My decisions get questioned. The trial your mother participated in gets reopened, examined by hostile lawyers looking for negligence. And maybe they find some. Maybe they find that we cut corners, rushed approvals, prioritized speed over safety. Maybe I go to prison too. So you want to protect yourself, Don says flatly. I want to protect everyone, Michelle corrects. If we all walk away quietly, maybe we all survive this. You forget you kidnapped me. I forget I was kidnapped. Teddy gets therapy instead of prison. Everyone goes back to their lives. It's a pragmatic offer, and Don recognizes it as such. But there's something wrong with it too. Teddy won't accept that, he says. He needs to believe you're guilty of something bigger than normal corporate evil. Otherwise, he's just a man who tortured an innocent person. Then convince him. I'm guilty, Michelle says, and her tone shifts, sharper now, more calculating. Let him think he's right. Let him think he exposed something. Give him a story he can live with. Because the alternative is, he never recovers from this, and neither do you. Before Dawn can respond, Teddy returns. He's different, not calmer, exactly, but resolved. I'm ending this, he announces. Tomorrow, one way or another. He doesn't elaborate, but the implication hangs heavy. Either he finds definitive proof, or he eliminates the evidence, which means eliminating Michelle. The film's tone shifts from darkly comic to genuinely tense. The basement feels smaller. The farmhouse feels more isolated. Time starts moving differently. Scenes are shorter, choppier, building momentum towards something catastrophic. Michelle uses Casey's stolen phone in the middle of the night, typing out a message to emergency services with her location. But before she can send it, she hesitates. Her finger hovers over the button, and then she deletes it. The film doesn't explain why. Is she calculating that rescue now would provoke Teddy into immediate violence? Is she waiting for better timing? Or is there another reason, something we haven't grasped yet? Morning comes. Teddy announces his final test. They're going to the hospital. All three of them. He's going to confront Michelle directly with his mother's body, force her to look at what her company did, and see how she reacts. If you're human, he says, you'll feel something, guilt, remorse, something. If you're not, you won't. And then I'll know. It's the logic of a man at the end of his rope, but Don doesn't argue. He's exhausted, desperate for resolution. They load Michelle into the van, still restrained, but less elaborately now. Teddy's not worried about escape anymore. He's past worrying about consequences. This is endgame. The drive to the hospital is silent except for highway noise. Michelle watches the landscape through the van windows, the first time she's seen outside in days. Her face reveals nothing, but Stone's eyes are active, recording, processing, a mind working behind the mask. They arrive at the hospital, and this is where everything breaks. The hospital's fluorescent lights feel obscene after days in the basement's dim yellow bulb. Teddy leads them through corridors with Michelle restrained between him and Dawn, her wrist bound with zip ties hidden under a coat. To casual observers, they look like family helping a sick relative. No one scrutinizes too closely in a place where everyone's dealing with their own tragedy. Sandy's room is in the long-term care wing, where the almost dead weight in pharmaceutical limbo. Teddy opens the door and the antiseptic smell hits immediately, that particular cocktail of disinfectant and slow decay that defines these spaces. Michelle sees Sandy and something shifts in her expression. Not shock, she knew what to expect, but recognition maybe, or calculation, or something else entirely. Look at her, Teddy demands, his voice tight. Look at what you did. Michelle approaches the bed slowly. She stands there for a long moment, studying the monitors, the tubes, the mechanized rise and fall of Sandy's chest. How long has she been like this? She asks quietly. 11 months, Teddy answers. Since the trial, since your drug destroyed her brain. What was the drug? Michelle asks. It's such a clinical question, so devoid of emotion that Dawn actually flinches. Teddy provides the name, some long pharmaceutical designation that means nothing to anyone except chemists and victims. Michelle nods slowly. Phase 2 trial. Alzheimer's intervention. I remember the data. You remember, Teddy repeats, his voice dangerous. You remember destroying people's lives. I remember, Michelle continues, unfazed, that the trial showed promise in 63% of participants, significant cognitive improvement, slow degeneration. 31% showed no change. 6% experienced adverse reactions. She looks at Sandy. Your mother was in the 6%. That's statistically acceptable for phase 2. It's the worst possible response, factually accurate but emotionally monstrous. Teddy's hands ball into fists. Dawn steps back, sensing the violence building. But before Teddy can act, Michelle continues, her voice dropping lower, almost intimate. But statistics don't help you, do they? When it's your mother in that bed, percentages don't matter. Acceptable losses stop being acceptable when the loss is yours. There's something in her tone that wasn't there before. Not quite empathy, but acknowledgement. Recognition of Teddy's pain as valid, even if she doesn't share it. And it diffuses him just enough. His fists unclench, his breathing steadies. Why do you do it? He asks. If you know the drugs hurt people, why keep making them? Michelle considers the question. Because the alternative is worse. No new drugs means no treatment for diseases that kill millions. Clinical trials require risk. We minimize it where possible, but we can't eliminate it. Progress has a body count. That's true in medicine, in technology, in every field that pushes boundaries. That's alien logic, Teddy insists. Sacrificing individuals for the collective. Humans don't think like that. Humans invented war, Michelle counters. Invented factory farming, strip mining, predatory lending. Humans sacrifice each other constantly. You don't need to be from another planet to be capable of harm. You just need to be human. And there it is again, the film's central ambiguity. Is Michelle defending her humanity by acknowledging human capacity for evil, or is she using human evil as cover for something non human? The film keeps both possibilities alive simultaneously. A nurse enters, clipboard in hand, and the dynamic instantly shifts. They're intruders now, caught. Teddy tries to bluff. We're family, just visiting, but the nurse looks skeptical. Her eyes land on Michelle's zip tied wrists, barely visible under the coat sleeve. I'm going to need to ask you to step outside, she says carefully, her hand moving toward the call button. Dawn panics. He glares the nurse, clamping a hand over her mouth, and Teddy's face goes white. This wasn't the plan. This was never the plan. But now there's a witness, a victim, a point of no return. The nurse struggles. Michelle watches. And then she does something unexpected. She yells, "Help! We need security. This man has a hostage." It's a gamble, forcing crisis, accelerating the inevitable. Hospital security arrives within seconds. Teddy releases Michelle immediately. He's not violent by nature, just desperate. Dawn lets go of the nurse, apologizing frantically, and Michelle, freed, doesn't run. She stands there, coat falling open to reveal the zip ties, and tells security, "These men kidnapped me 4 days ago. I'm Michelle Fuller, CEO of Pharmax Industries. Please call the police. Game over, or so it seems." But Teddy does something that catches everyone off guard. He doesn't fight, doesn't flee. He walks calmly to his mother's bed, leans down, and whispers something in her ear. Then he pulls a syringe from his jacket, prepared for this moment, though no one knew, and injects something into Sandy's IV line. The monitors scream immediately. Alarms, alerts, medical staff flooding in. Sandy's vitals crash. Michelle watches with an expression that's impossible to read. Security tackles Teddy, but the damage is done. Sandy flatlines. The medical team attempts resuscitation, but Teddy shakes his head. "She's DNR," he says quietly. "Do not resuscitate. It's in her file." And he's right. Sandy had signed the order herself, before the trial, before the coma, a practical woman making practical decisions. So the medical team steps back, lets the machines wind down, lets her die. Teddy killed his mother. Not the drug, not the company, not the aliens. Him. He euthanized her, ended her suffering, or ended his suffering through her, or both. The film doesn't moralize. It just observes. Police arrive. Teddy and Dawn are arrested without resistance. Michelle gives a statement. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault. The evidence is overwhelming. Open and shut. Except Michelle adds something at the end, something the film lets us see, but the police don't quite catch. She looks directly at Teddy as they're loading him into the patrol car and mouths 2 words, "Thank you." Why? What is she thanking him for? Proving her point about human cruelty? providing her with a narrative that exonerates her company. Look how crazy these conspiracy theorists are, or something else, something the film has been building toward but hasn't revealed yet. Cut to Michelle back at Pharmex headquarters. She's been debriefed, examined, offered counseling. The board of directors expresses concern, support, outrage on her behalf. The marketing team is already spinning the story. CEO survives kidnapping by deranged conspiracy theorist, shows remarkable resilience, returns to work to continue saving lives through pharmaceutical innovation. It's cynical but effective. Michelle sits in her office alone, looking out at the city. Her assistant brings files work has piled up, decisions need making. One file in particular catches her attention. It's the report on Sandy's drug trial. The 6% with adverse reactions. Michelle opens it and reads through the data carefully. The film holds on her face as she reads. And then, just for a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, something happens. Her eyes change. Not color, not shape, but something in the quality of her gaze. It becomes deeper, older, more alien than any DMT hallucination could produce. And then it's gone, so quickly you might have imagined it. She picks up the phone, dials an internal extension. Cancel the phase 3 trial, she says. The adverse reaction percentage is too high. Pull the drug and start over with a new compound. She hangs up, makes another call. Set up a foundation for clinical trial victims. Fund it with 10 million from my personal account. Make sure Sandy Gatz's family is the first recipient. She hangs up again. Is this guilt? Is this a human executive making a rare ethical choice? Or is this an alien covering tracks, buying goodwill, ensuring the operation continues without further scrutiny? The film doesn't tell you. It shows you actions and lets you interpret motive. Later that night, Michelle returns to her penthouse apartment. It's immaculate, modern, expensive, devoid of personality. She pours a drink, something amber and presumably expensive, and stands at the floor to ceiling windows overlooking the city. Millions of lights, millions of humans, going about their lives, unaware of the complexities and compromises and casualties required to maintain their comfort. Her phone rings. She answers. Yes, a pause. The host is gone. The mission continues. Another pause. No complications. The conspiracy theorist is discredited. The journalist is traumatized into silence. The cousin is facing felony charges. She listens. Accelerate the timeline. 3 years, maybe 4. The species is close to critical threshold. She hangs up. And the film finally confirms what Teddy suspected but couldn't prove. Michelle is not human. Or rather, Michelle Fuller, the person might have been human once, but what inhabits her now is not. The film doesn't show transformation or special effects. It simply shows Stone's performance shift. The mask dropping for just a moment when she's alone, unobserved, and something ancient and cold peers through. But here's the twist that elevates Bugonia beyond simple science fiction. The revelation doesn't change the pragmatic reality. Whether Michelle is an alien infiltrator or a ruthless human CEO, the harm is identical. The people in clinical trials die the same way. The profits flow upward the same way. The systems perpetuate themselves the same way. Teddy's conspiracy theory was correct in cosmic detail, but wrong in practical application. Because knowing Michelle is an alien doesn't give you tools to stop her. She operates within legal frameworks. She has government protection. She has power that transcends species. The film cuts to Teddy in jail, awaiting trial. Dawn in another cell, looking lost. Casey presumably somewhere, drinking or dissociating or writing an article she'll never publish. And Sandy in a morgue, finally released from pharmaceutical purgatory. Teddy sits on his bunk, staring at nothing. A guard brings him a package, cleared by security, delivered by anonymous courier. Inside is a single item, a photograph of Michelle. But it's an old photograph, maybe 20 years old, and she looks exactly the same. Not aged, not different, exactly the same. And on the back, in handwriting that might be Michelle's, a single sentence. Some truths can't be proven. Teddy laughs, not a happy laugh, a broken, vindicated, completely hollow laugh. He was right. And it doesn't matter, he'll go to prison for kidnapping. Michelle will continue running Pharmex. The world will keep turning, the invasion will proceed. But the film isn't done. There's one more reveal, one more twist that reframes everything. Because the package also contains something else, a USB drive. And on that drive, security footage from the hospital. From Sandy's room, showing Michelle leaning over Sandy's bed while security was restraining Teddy, showing Michelle whispering something in Sandy's ear, showing Michelle's hand just for a second touching Sandy's forehead, and showing something passing between them, not physically, something else. A shimmer, a transfer, a moment where Sandy's eyes open just for an instant and show that same ancient alien awareness before closing again. The implication: Sandy wasn't killed by the drug. Sandy was chosen. Her body was being prepared as a vessel, and Michelle's visit was the final step in some process Teddy couldn't comprehend. And Teddy's euthanasia? It interrupted something, saved his mother from something worse than death. The film doesn't spell this out. It shows you footage, lets you make connections, trusts you to understand the horror. Teddy watches the video in his cell, watches it again. Proof, finally definitive proof, and completely inadmissible. Smuggled evidence, unclear chain of custody, easily dismissed as doctored. Even if he showed it to authorities, who'd believe him? The man who kidnapped a CEO and killed his own mother, now claiming alien possession? Truth becomes irrelevant when it's unprovable. That's the real horror at the center of Bugonia. The trial becomes a media circus, but not the kind Teddy hoped for. He's not the whistleblower exposing alien infiltration. He's the cautionary tale about internet radicalization, about conspiracy theories metastasizing into violence. The prosecution paints him as a dangerous obsessive who kidnapped an innocent woman based on paranoid delusions. The defense tries for diminished capacity, grief-induced psychosis, temporary insanity. Neither narrative comes close to what actually happened. Don takes a plea deal. 5 years for unlawful imprisonment and assault. His lawyer argues limited culpability. He was manipulated by his older, more intelligent cousin, influenced by familial loyalty, never the primary actor. It's partially true, which makes it effective. Don testifies against Teddy, not because he wants to, but because his public defender convinces him is the only path to eventual freedom. On the stand, he describes the basement, the interrogations, the DMT trip. He cries when recounting his mother's death. Wait, no, Teddy's mother. The detail matters legally, establishes emotional stakes. Teddy refuses any plea deal. He wants trial, wants his day in court, wants to present evidence of pharmaceutical malfeasance and possible extraterrestrial infiltration. His lawyer, overworked, underpaid, constitutionally obligated to provide representation, tries to talk him out of it. You have video evidence of kidnapping, the lawyer explains patiently. You killed your mother on camera. Our best option is minimizing sentence, not winning. But Teddy insists, so the trial proceeds. Michelle testifies, describing her ordeal with calm precision. She doesn't embellish, doesn't play victim dramatically, just facts. Abducted, imprisoned, assaulted, drugged against her will. Stone plays it with the same measured control she's maintained throughout, and it's devastating precisely because it's understated. The jury looks at her, composed, professional, clearly successful, and then at Teddy disheveled, desperate, muttering about aliens, and the verdict is never in doubt. Teddy's testimony is where the film twists the knife. He tells his story truthfully: pharmaceutical trial, mother's coma, his research into corporate malfeasance, his growing conviction that something non-human was responsible. He presents evidence, the patents, the data, the electromagnetic readings. The prosecution lets him talk, lets him bury himself, because every word sounds insane to anyone who wasn't there. When he mentions the USB drive, the proof of alien transfer at the hospital, the prosecution objects. The evidence was obtained illegally, chain of custody unclear, authenticity unverifiable. The judge sustains. The video never enters official record, and Teddy watches his truth get excluded on technicalities, legal procedures designed to ensure fairness, but which, in this case, protects something genuinely monstrous. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentencing: 23 years. Teddy shows no reaction. He's past reaction, past hope. He's a man who touched truth and found it inert, powerless, cosmically irrelevant. Dawn serves 3 years before release. The film shows him briefly post-prison working at a different grocery store, living alone, attending court-mandated therapy. He doesn't talk about what happened. When people ask about his cousin, he changes the subject. He's learned that some experiences exist outside language, beyond explanation. He knows what he saw in that basement, in Michelle's eyes during the DMT trip, In the hospital footage Teddy showed him before the trial. But knowing doesn't help him, it just makes grocery store work harder. Every day a reminder that the world is stranger and darker than anyone admits. Casey never publishes the story. She writes it. The film shows her typing, deleting, typing again, but she can't find the angle that doesn't make her complicit. She attended a kidnapping, participated in drugging a hostage, left without calling police. She's a journalist who became part of the story in the worst possible way. The Article 6 in her drafts folder, 15,000 words of career suicide. Eventually, she deletes it, becomes a copywriter for an advertising firm. Steady paycheck, ethical simplicity, no more chasing truth. And Michelle, she thrives. The kidnapping becomes a profile in resilience. Major outlets run features about her recovery, her courage, her commitment to pharmaceutical innovation despite personal trauma. Pharmex's stock price actually increases. The foundation she established for clinical trial victims gets lauded as progressive corporate responsibility. She testifies before Congress about the need for better security for female executives, better mental health support to prevent radicalization like Teddy's. Every appearance, every interview, she's perfect. Measured, compassionate, strategic. But the film doesn't let her win without complication, because now we're watching her with knowledge. Every board meeting where she approves drugs with known side effects, we see the alien calculation. Every press conference where she expresses sympathy for victims, we see the performance. Every moment alone, we catch glimpses of the mask slipping, her movements becoming too precise, her stillness too complete, her gaze too ancient for a 44-year-old human. The film's final act takes place 3 years after Teddy's conviction. Michelle stands at a pharmaceutical conference delivering a keynote about breakthrough therapies. The audience is hundreds of industry leaders, investors, researchers, all human, presumably. She talks about the next generation of drugs, compounds that promise to extend human lifespan by decades, to eliminate age-related cognitive decline, to enhance biological performance beyond current limitations. We are on the cusp of something unprecedented, she tells the crowd, not just treating disease, but transcending human biological limitations entirely. Within 5 years, we'll have therapies that fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The applause is enthusiastic. No one questions the phrasing, alter what it means to be human. They hear progress, they hear profit. They don't hear the threat wrapped in promise. After the keynote, Michelle meets with a small group in a private suite, other executives, other powerful figures. The film shoots this scene differently, wider angles, more distance, observing rather than participating. We can't hear the full conversation, just fragments. Timeline accelerated. Resistance minimal. Final phase begins next quarter. And then one of them asks, what about the conspiracy theorist, the one from years ago? Michelle smiles slightly. Discredited, imprisoned, irrelevant. The beauty of operating within legal systems is that truth becomes whatever can be proven in court, and we control what evidence is admissible. Another executive nods. And the journalist? Michelle's smile doesn't fade. Silent, complicit in her silence. She made the calculation career survival over truth exposure. Most humans make that calculation eventually. The meeting ends. Michelle returns to her hotel room. And here's where the film delivers its final, devastating reveal. She sits at the desk, opens her laptop, and begins typing a report. The camera moves closer, showing the text on screen. It's not English. It's not any human language. Symbols, glyphs, something that hurts to look at for too long. And then the film translates, subtitles appearing, species assessment, year 27 of infiltration, psychological integration, successful. Biological preparation, 73% complete, resistance, negligible. Primary barriers to annexation eliminated through internal contradiction. Species prioritizes individual profit over collective survival, ensuring cooperation in their own displacement. Recommendation, proceed to phase 7. Estimated timeline, 47 months until full integration. Michelle closes the laptop, looks out the window at the city below, and her expression isn't triumphant. It's not evil. It's just evaluative, like a scientist observing a petri dish. The film cuts to the final sequence, and it's pure Lanthimos, unexpected, ambiguous, haunting. We are back at Teddy's farm, now abandoned. The house is empty, windows broken, property seized and auctioned. But the beehives remain, somehow. Still active, still producing honey, despite no human tending them. The camera moves slowly through the apiary, Bees swarm in patterns that seem almost coordinated, almost intelligent, and then we see it. The hives are thriving beyond normal capacity. They've grown, expanded, created structures that don't match typical bee architecture. Something's changed, something's evolved. The film ends on a shot of a single bee, extreme close up. Its eyes compound, inhuman, reflect something. For just a frame, maybe two, we see a face in the reflection, not human, not quite insect, something else, something ancient and patient and inevitable. Cut to black, roll credits, no resolution, no hope. No final confrontation where the hero saves the day because the hero is in prison and the villain is giving TED Talks. Just the slow, methodical suggestion that whatever Michelle represents, it's already won. The invasion isn't violent, it's administrative, it's pharmaceutical, it's legal. But wait, there's a mid credits scene. Because of course there is. Teddy in prison, older now, grayer. A visitor arrives. It's not Dawn, not Casey. It's a young woman, maybe mid-20s, holding a notebook. Mr. Gatz, she says, I'm a researcher. I've been looking into your case, into pharmaceutical patterns you identified. I think you might have been onto something. Teddy looks at her with exhausted eyes. Doesn't matter. No one will believe you either. She leans forward. Maybe not. But I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm trying to understand. She pulls out documents, new evidence, new patterns, cases similar to Sandy's. There are others like you, she says. People who saw things, questioned things, got silenced. We're organizing, quietly, not to fight. We can't win that way, but to document, to preserve truth even if we can't prove it. Teddy considers this. Why are you telling me? Because, she says, you were right, and someone should acknowledge that, even if it's just me, even if it doesn't change anything. She leaves. Teddy sits alone, and for the first time since the trial, something shifts in his expression. Not hope, exactly, but recognition. The knowledge that being right matters, even in isolation, even in futility. It's a small victory in a losing war, but it's something. Final image, the young researcher walking out of the prison. She gets into her car. On the passenger seat, a file labeled the Bugonia Protocol, the ancient Greek word for spontaneous generation, life from death. She drives away. The camera holds on the prison, then pans up to the sky, where clouds move in patterns that might be natural or might be something else entirely. Credits roll for real this time. Bugonia ends not with answers but with implications. It confirms the conspiracy while demonstrating its ineffectiveness. Teddy was right. Michelle is alien. Pharmaceuticals are weapons. Invasion is underway. But being right didn't save him, didn't stop anything, didn't matter in any measurable way. The film asks, in a world where truth is functionally indistinguishable from madness, where power operates through legal structures designed to resist exposure, where the apocalypse arrives through quarterly earnings, reports and FDA approvals, what does resistance even look like? The answer Bugonia offers is bleak. Resistance looks like documentation, like small groups preserving truth for no audience, like prisoners who were right but powerless, like bees that survive their keepers, adapting to whatever comes next. It's not heroic, it's barely hopeful, but it's what remains when conventional narratives, good defeats evil, truth prevails, justice triumphs, prove inadequate to the complexities of systemic corruption and existential invasion. Some viewers will hate this ending. It denies catharsis, refuses heroism, sits uncomfortably with genre expectations. But that's precisely Lanthimos' point. The film argues that our narrative instincts, our desire for satisfying conclusions, clear villains, definitive victories, blind us to how power actually operates in late-stage capitalism. The real horror isn't aliens. It's that aliens make the system more efficient without fundamentally changing it. Welcome to Bugonia. Nobody is coming to save you. The invasion is already complete, and it was always going to be. Now let's talk about how Bugonia looks, because Yorgos Lanthimos and cinematographer Robbie Ryan made deliberate choices that transformed this conspiracy thriller into something visually distinctive. Ryan has shot every Lanthimos film since The Favourite, developing a visual language that's become synonymous with the director's off-kilter worldview. But Bugonia required something different. Not period piece elegance, not the fisheye surrealism of Poor Things, but contemporary realism with subtle wrongness seeping through. The decision to shoot on 35mm film in VistaVision format immediately separates Bugonia from the digital smoothness dominating contemporary cinema. VistaVision uses the film horizontally rather than vertically, creating a wider negative area that yields higher resolution and richer grain structure. It's the same format Hitchcock used for Vertigo and North by Northwest films about paranoia, surveillance, and reality fracturing. The choice feels intentional, linking Bugonia to cinema's history of psychological thrillers while giving it a textual quality that suits its themes. Film Rain becomes a character in itself. In Michelle's corporate environments, her office, boardrooms, conference centers, the grain is finer, more controlled, reflecting spaces designed for maximum efficiency and minimal humanity. The lighting in these scenes skews cool, fluorescent, with that particular blue-white quality of LED office lights. Everything feels sanitized, and the 35mm captures that sterility without making it look ugly. It's beautiful in its coldness, which makes it more unsettling. You want to leave these spaces even as you're seduced by their clean lines and expensive finishes. Contrast that with Teddy's farmhouse and the basement where most of the film takes place. Here the grain becomes pronounced, tactile, almost gritty. Ryan lights these scenes with practical sources, bare bulbs, lanterns, whatever Teddy would realistically have access to. The color temperature shifts warmer but muddier, yellows and browns dominating. It's the opposite of corporate sterility, organic, lived in, decaying. The 35mm film stock absorbs these environments differently, creating shadows that feel deeper, darkness that feels more absolute. The basement itself is shot to emphasize claustrophobia without resorting to obvious visual tricks. Ryan uses wider lenses than you'd expect. Not quite fisheye, but wide enough that the space feels simultaneously cramped and expansive. You're always aware of the walls, the low ceiling, the concrete floor, but you're also seeing too much of the space at once. It creates this disorienting effect where you can't quite gauge distances, can't quite orient yourself, which mirrors Michelle's captivity perfectly. She knows exactly where she is, but has no sense of how to escape. Camera movement in the basement scenes is minimal. Ryan favors static frames or very slow, almost imperceptible pushes. In this restraint makes the few sudden movements during the DMT sequence during moments of violence land with greater impact. When the camera finally breaks free from its observational distance, it feels like the film itself is losing control along with the characters. The framing throughout Bugonia consistently places characters off center, often in uncomfortable positions within the frame. Michelle is frequently positioned at extreme edges, cut off by the frame's border, suggesting her displacement, her removal from normal context. Teddy is often framed through doorways, windows, barriers that create layers between him and the camera, emphasizing his isolation. Dawn appears in backgrounds, slightly out of focus, a peripheral presence even in scenes where he is actively participating. Ryan and Lanthimos employ a technique that's become a signature, the extremely wide two-shot, where actors are separated by vast empty space. When Teddy and Michelle talk in the basement, the frame often includes both of them with meters of nothing between them. This dead space becomes weighted, charged with everything unsaid, everything unresolved. The composition forces you to choose where to look, whose face to read, making you an active participant rather than passive observer. The hospital scenes introduce a third visual language. Here Ryan uses long, unbroken takes, steadicam work that glides through corridors with eerie smoothness. The camera becomes ghostly, observing without judgment as Teddy leads Michelle through institutional spaces. The lighting is harsh and flat, typical hospital fluorescence, but shot on film it takes on an otherworldly quality. Everything looks slightly overexposed, slightly too bright, creating that dissociative feeling hospitals produce. You're awake, but it feels like a dream or a nightmare. Sandy's room is lit with particular care. Ryan positions a soft key light near the window, suggesting natural daylight but controlled to avoid harshness. Sandy's face is always visible, always clear, never falling into shadow. It's almost reverential, this lighting treating her comatose body with dignity the narrative denies her. And when Michelle approaches the bed, when that alien transfer possibly occurs, the light doesn't change dramatically. There's no flash, no obvious effect, just a subtle shift in how light catches Michelle's face, a slight flare in her eyes that could be lens artifact or could be something else. Color grading throughout Bugonia is deliberately desaturated without being monochromatic. Ryan and colorist Peter Berger push toward a palette that feels contemporary and slightly drained, not quite the sickly greens of The Matrix or the bleached outlook of Sicario, but somewhere in that spectrum. Blues and greys dominate, with occasional punches of color that draw attention: the amber of Teddy's honey jars, the red of Michelle's power suit in early scenes, the green of hospital scrubs. The DMT sequence breaks every visual rule the film has established. Here, Ryan and Lanthimos go deliberately artificial fish-eye lenses, prismatic effects, light leaks, all the techniques they'd avoided until this moment. The 35mm film responds beautifully to these manipulations, grain structure breaking apart and reassembling in ways that digital can't quite replicate. Colors separate and bleed. Edges soften and sharpen randomly. Time seems to stretch and compress not through editing but through in-camera effects, varying frame rates, multiple exposures, techniques from experimental cinema's toolkit. Each character's DMT perspective gets its own visual treatment. Teddy's POV becomes increasingly abstract, Michelle's form dissolving into patterns, her face fragmenting into insectoid features. Ryan achieves this primarily through practical means: light flickering at specific frequencies, shadows cast through textured glass, Michelle herself contorting her body in ways that read as alien when shot from specific angles. It's not CGI transformation, it's Emma Stone moving unnaturally while lit to emphasize wrongness. Casey's POV becomes more about environmental horror. The basement walls seem to close in, achieved through slight shifts in lens choice and careful choreography rather than actual set movement. Text on Teddy's conspiracy wall enlarges, becomes legible, then transforms into accusatory headlines about Casey's complicity. Ryan shoots these moments with rapid focal length changes, racking focus so aggressively it becomes nauseating. Dawn's POV is perhaps most disturbing because it strips away surfaces entirely. Ryan employs infrared filming techniques, X-ray visual effects created practically, and extreme close-ups that turn human skin into alien landscape. The goal is showing Dawn's desperate attempt to see essential truth, to find difference between human and alien at the cellular level, and finding only similarity, which terrifies him more than difference would. Michelle's POV during the trip remains relatively stable, suggesting her consciousness isn't affected the same way. But Ryan introduces subtle shifts. The grain pattern becomes mathematical, organizing into almost geometric structures. Colors separate into visible spectrums, as if she's seeing light waves humans can't normally perceive. Time markers appear in the frame's corners, barely visible, like heads-up display elements bleeding through from some internal processing system. Post-trip, the film returns to its established visual language but slightly altered. You've seen behind the curtain, seen the film's visual grammar broken, and now the normal cinematography feels less secure. Every static frame, you wait for it to fracture. Every controlled composition, you wonder if it's about to collapse. The courtroom scenes introduce yet another visual mode: documentary-style realism. Ryan shoots these sequences with longer lenses, more conventional coverage, mimicking actual court proceedings. It's deliberately less stylized, less artistic, emphasizing that institutional spaces flatten everything, render even alien invasion into bureaucratic procedure. The film's visual audacity gets constrained by legal architecture, just as Teddy's truth gets constrained by evidential rules. Prison scenes are shot through barriers, always a pane of glass, mesh screen, or bars between camera and Teddy. Even when the camera is in his cell, it feels like we are observing through some separating layer. The color palette becomes almost monochromatic, blues and grays exclusively, emphasizing institutional dehumanization. The final pharmaceutical conference sequence brings back corporate visual language but heightened. Ryan lights Michelle like she's giving a TED Talk single spot, dark background, all attention focused on her face. Is the visual grammar of inspiration and innovation used to deliver apocalyptic subtext. The irony is visual as much as narrative. The ending at the bee farm returns to natural light, golden hour cinematography that would feel hopeful in another film. Ryan shoots the highs with the same attention he gave Michelle's face. Close, careful, revealing unexpected detail. The bees themselves become subjects worthy of beauty, and the 35mm captures their movements with a richness digital would render too sharp, too clinical. That final shot, the bee's eye reflecting something non-human, is achieved practically. No CGI creature, just careful manipulation of macro photography, lighting, and reflection. What you're seeing in that compound eye is ambiguous enough that your brain fills in the horror. It's a magic trick of cinematography, showing you nothing specific but suggesting everything terrible. Throughout Bugonia, Ryan's cinematography operates on a principle of controlled wrongness. Nothing is obviously distorted, nothing screams, this is artificial, yet everything feels slightly off. Angles are subtly uncomfortable, distances feel wrong, spaces don't quite make geometric sense. It's the visual equivalent of uncanny valley, familiar enough to seem real, distorted enough to feel wrong. The 35mm film stock itself becomes thematically relevant. Film is organic material, literally, chemically changed by light exposure. It's biological in ways digital sensors aren't. So shooting a film about alien infiltration of biological systems on organic film stock creates a metatextual layer. The medium itself is vulnerable to change, to corruption, to transformation. Every frame has been physically altered by the light it captured, making the filmmaking process mirror the film's themes. Ryan's work on Bugonia doesn't call attention to itself with showy camera moves or obvious artistry. It's more insidious than that. The cinematography establishes visual normalcy and then undermines it slowly, almost imperceptibly, until you realize you've been watching something deeply wrong dressed in the language of realism. That's harder to achieve than obvious style, and it's what makes Bugonia visually memorable despite or because of its restraint. The film looks like it could be happening, like someone could shoot this documentary style, point a camera at these events, and capture them objectively. That's the trick. That's the horror. The cinematography never lets you dismiss this as fantasy because it's presented with the visual credibility of truth. And once you've accepted the visual language as real, you have to contend with what it's showing you. No escape into it's just a movie. Aesthetics. You're forced to engage with the nightmare on its own terms, shot with the clarity and craft of observational realism. Performance in a Lanthimos film requires a specific calibration. His actors can't rely on naturalism because his words aren't natural. Yet they can't go full theatrical because that would shatter the documentary style realism his films pretend toward. They need to exist in this uncanny middle space, recognizable as human behavior but slightly wrong, like listening to someone speak your language with syntax just off enough to create unease. Emma Stone has mastered this over 3 films with Lanthimos, and in Bugonia, she delivers what might be her most challenging work yet. Michelle Fuller requires Stone to play multiple layers simultaneously. On the surface, competent CEO, controlled and professional. Beneath that, possible victim processing trauma. Beneath that, possible alien maintaining cover. And beneath everything, ambiguity about which interpretation is correct. Stone never tips her hand. Watch her face during interrogation scenes. There's calculation happening. But is it human self-preservation or extraterrestrial assessment? The genius is that both readings work frame by frame. Stone's physicality shifts subtly throughout the film. In early corporate scenes, before the abduction, her movements are efficient and precise, economical gestures that waste no energy. After captivity begins, she adds slight hesitations, small flinches that suggest fear and vulnerability. But watch carefully, those flinches are controlled. They stop exactly when they've achieved effect. It's either trauma response or performance of trauma response, and Stone plays it so the distinction becomes impossible. The DMT sequence gives Stone license to break from restraint. Her body contorts in ways that read as either extreme drug response or something inhuman briefly losing control. She convulses, arches, her face cycling through expressions faster than conscious thought allows. But even here, there's control underneath. Stone is an actress giving a virtuoso physical performance, but Michelle might be an alien, allowing humans to see what they expect, frightening shapelessness while retaining complete awareness. Stone's vocal work deserves particular attention. She maintains the flat affect Lanthimos favors, but modulates it with microscopic variations. When Michelle offers legal justifications for clinical trial casualties, her voice remains level but drops slightly in volume, becoming almost intimate. It's a technique cult leaders use, quiet intensity that draws listeners closer. When she thanks Teddy at the hospital, it's barely audible, requiring you to lean in, to engage actively with her words rather than passively receiving them. The reveal scenes. When Michelle is alone, when the mask drops, Stone plays with minimal external change. A slight relaxation in her shoulders, eyes that stop blinking at normal intervals, stillness that becomes too complete. She doesn't transform into an alien creature because that would be B-movie schlock. She just stops performing humanity, and the absence is terrifying. It's negative space acting. What she's not doing becomes the performance. Jesse Plemons approaches Teddy from the opposite direction. Where Stone builds from restraint, Plemons builds from barely controlled chaos. Teddy is a man vibrating at a frequency just beyond stable, and Plemons shows you all the effort required to maintain surface functionality. His hand shakes slightly when he's trying to appear calm. His voice stays even, but his eyes dart, tracking threats real and imagined. Plemons excels at playing men whose decency has been weaponized into violence. Teddy genuinely believes he's saving humanity, genuinely grieves his mother, genuinely fears for Earth's future. That sincerity makes his actions more disturbing, not less. When he attaches electrodes to Michelle's head, Plemons plays it like a surgeon, preparing for necessary procedure, focused, careful, reluctant but committed. The horror isn't sadism, it's conviction. The courtroom testimony scene showcases Plemons' range. Teddy has to explain his entire conspiracy theory to people who already decided he's insane. Plemons doesn't play it as ranting, he plays it as a presentation, like he's defending a thesis. He's earnest, occasionally checking his notes, making eye contact with jury members. He wants them to understand. And Plemons makes you understand why Teddy needs them to understand. Because if his theory is wrong, he's a monster. So the theory must be right. The psychological trap plays across Plemons' face. Desperation disguised as confidence, doubt buried under certainty. In prison, Plemons shows us Teddy hollowed out. The manic energy is gone, replaced by something worse. Quiet acceptance. He's been right about everything, and it hasn't mattered. That defeat sits in Plemons' posture, his voice, the way he barely reacts to the researcher's visit. He's a man who's learned that truth without power is just noise, and Plemons plays that lesson as soul death. Aidan Delbis as Don faces perhaps the most difficult role playing a character with autism without falling into stereotype or inspiration porn. Delbis gives Don literal mindedness that reads as both vulnerability and strength. When Teddy explains the alien theory, Don doesn't dismiss it because social cues tell him to. He evaluates it based on evidence presented. When evidence is ambiguous, he defaults to trusting family. That logic is sound from his perspective, even if it leads to complicity in kidnapping. Delbis never plays Don's autism as quirky or cute. It's simply how Don processes the world, more slowly, more carefully, with different priorities than neurotypical characters. His growing discomfort with the situation isn't sudden moral awakening, it's accumulated data points. Michelle's humanity signals, the physical intimacy of captivity, Casey's reaction, adding up to a conclusion that contradicts his initial trust in Teddy. The shift is gradual and Delbis plays it with painful authenticity. The supporting cast works in smaller strokes. Alicia Silverstone as Comatose. Sandy has almost no traditional performance. She is unconscious for her entire screen time. But in the brief flashback that shows her before the trial, Silverstone plays Sandy's optimism, her genuine desire to contribute to medical progress, with warmth that makes her tragedy land harder. This was a real person, not a plot device, and Silverstone ensures we feel that loss. The actress playing Casey, unnamed in most reviews, suggesting a breakout debut, navigates the tricky role of audience surrogate. She is the skeptic, the voice of reason, the person who should call the police but doesn't. The performance requires showing that internal conflict, professional ethics versus personal loyalty, journalistic objectivity versus survival instinct, without making Casey seem weak or stupid. She plays Casey as someone who makes understandable bad decisions, the kind we all might make when fear and confusion override training. Now let's talk about what you hear, because Jeskin Fendrick's score and Johnny Burns' sound design create an audio landscape that's as disturbing as the visuals. Fendricks, who scored Poor Things with orchestral maximalism, takes the opposite approach here. Bugonia's score is minimal, often absent, and when present it's more texture than melody. The basement scenes feature low-frequency drones, sounds you feel more than hear, vibrations that sit in your chest and create ambient dread. These drones aren't consistent. They pulse irregularly, like a heartbeat that's slightly wrong. Your body registers the wrongness before your conscious mind does. It's subliminal horror, using sound to trigger physical discomfort. Teddy's bee farm scenes introduce organic sounds, buzzing of course, but processed to sound almost mechanical. Fendrix takes natural bee sounds and subtly pitch shifts them, adds reverb, layers them until the swarm becomes a collective intelligence rather than individual insects. It's beautiful and unsettling simultaneously, suggesting nature that's evolved beyond naturalness. Corporate scenes get different treatment, almost no score, just ambient sound of HVAC systems, elevator mechanisms, keyboards clicking. But these sounds are too clean, too precise. Real offices have acoustic messiness, chairs squeaking, distant conversations, random noise. Bugonia's corporate spaces sound artificially perfect, suggesting environments designed for maximum efficiency and minimum humanity. The DMT sequence explodes sonically. Fendrix layers dissonant strings, electronic distortions, pitch down voices, and what sounds like metallic scraping into an almost unbearable wall of sound. Each character's perspective gets slightly different audio treatment. During Teddy's POV, Michelle's voice becomes multiple voices speaking simultaneously. During Casey's POV, her own breathing becomes deafeningly loud. During Dawn's POV, all sound becomes muffled, underwater like. Michelle's POV is most disturbing. Everything becomes preternaturally clear, every sound isolated and identifiable, as if she's processing audio data rather than experiencing it. Sound design by Johnny Byrne uses silence as aggressively as noise. The film will cut sound completely during key moments. When Michelle first wakes in the basement, when Teddy injects his mother, when the verdict is read. These silence pockets force attention, eliminate distraction, make you lean into the image. And when sound returns, it feels like assault, even when it's just normal room tone. Foley work is particularly detailed. Every chain movement, every zip tie tightening, every footstep on concrete is crisp and present. The film makes you hyper aware of physical contact, physical restraint. You hear fabric on skin, plastic on wrist, metal on bone. It's tactile sound design that emphasizes Michelle's body as object, as thing being acted upon. Dialogue mixing favors extreme clarity. You hear every word, even whispered ones, even when characters are far from camera. This isn't realistic. In real spaces, sound drops off with distance. But Bugonia wants you catching every word, every implication. The unnatural clarity creates paranoid listening. You're hearing things characters shouldn't be able to hear, positioned as surveillance, as observer with privileged access. The score's most memorable motif is barely a motif, three descending piano notes, played softly and irregularly throughout. They appear during transitions, during moments of realization, during scenes where nothing obvious is happening, but something fundamental is shifting. The notes don't resolve, they just descend and stop, creating musical unfinished business that mirrors the narrative's refusal of closure. Yorgos Mavropsaridis' editing ties everything together with rhythms that feel both precise and off-kilter. Mavropsaridis has cut every Lanthimos film since Dogtooth, developing an editorial voice that serves the director's sensibility perfectly. Bugonia requires juggling multiple tones, thriller, comedy, horror, drama often within the same scene, and the editing determines which tone dominates moment to moment. Basement interrogation scenes are edited with patience that borders on uncomfortable. Shots hold longer than conventional coverage would allow. When someone asks a question, we stay on the asker's face through the pause before response, making you feel the silence, the calculation, the power dynamic. Then we cut to the responder, but not immediately, a beat late, creating slight temporal displacement that keeps you off balance. The editing establishes a rhythm and then breaks it deliberately. The film will cut between two characters in conventional shot reverse shot pattern, lulling you into expecting continuation. Then suddenly we hold on one face for 20 seconds while the other speaks off screen. Or we cut to an insert, Michelle's chained hands, Teddy's trembling fingers, that interrupts conversation flow and redirects attention to physical detail. Action scenes, the abduction, the hospital confrontation are edited with surprising restraint. No rapid cutting, no shaky cam chaos. Mavropsaridis lets violence play out in extended takes or cuts that clearly show geography and action. The clarity makes it worse. You're forced to watch everything rather than getting fragmented impressions. When Teddy tases Michelle, the shot holds. When Dawn tackles Teddy, the take continues through the entire struggle. Clarity denies you the comfort of disorientation. The DMT sequence lets Mavropsaridis experiment with aggressive cutting, jump cuts, flash frames, temporal loops, but it's controlled experimentation. The cuts follow internal logic, reflecting consciousness fracturing under psychedelic stress. When the trip ends, the editing snaps back to normal so abruptly it's almost violent, emphasizing the clash from altered state to baseline reality. Courtroom scenes use the most conventional editing in the film standard coverage, shot reverse shot, establishing shots. This conventionality is strategic. The editing suggests institutional normalcy, systems functioning as designed. But pay attention to what's cut out. We never see full testimonies, never get complete arguments. The editing presents fragments, suggesting vast testimonial content reduced to digestible clips, truth edited into narrative, raw experience transformed into legal story. The final montage, Michelle's rise, Teddy's imprisonment, Dawn's release, Casey's silence, is edited like a music video. Images cut to Fendrick's spa score. Each vignette is brief, elliptical, suggestive. Mavropsaridis compresses 3 years into 90 seconds, making time elastic, showing how individual tragedy becomes statistical backdrop to Michelle's continued success. Performance, sound, and editing combine to create Bugonia's sustained unease. No single element screams artifice, yet together they construct a reality that feels fundamentally wrong. Stone's controlled performance plus Plemons' barely controlled desperation, filtered through Fendrick's minimal score and Mavropsaridis' patient cutting, becomes greater than component parts. The craft creates the conspiracy's plausibility. If this much care and precision went into showing these events, maybe there's something to them. The film uses technical excellence to validate paranoia, which is either brilliant or deeply irresponsible depending on your perspective. Bugonia leaves you with a question that lingers long after the credits. If the conspiracy is real but functionally unstoppable, what exactly is this story for? It's not a call to arms in the traditional sense. The film makes it brutally clear that one angry man in a basement can't derail a system that's global, legal, and financially incentivized to keep going. Instead, Lanthimos builds a kind of anti-comfort narrative, dismantling the usual ways we soothe ourselves about power, evil, and truth. Most conspiracy stories eventually reassure us. Either the conspiracy is exposed and punished, or is revealed to be exaggerated. The hero learns to trust institutions again, and we walk out feeling the world is ultimately stable. Bugonia refuses both options. Teddy is right about the core horror. There is something inhuman steering pharmaceutical power, but he is catastrophically wrong about what his knowledge can accomplish. The film's bleak joke is that he is too small to matter, too late to intervene, and too compromised to be believed. That's where the title becomes a thesis. Bugonia, the ancient idea that life can spring from a corpse, bees emerging from the body of a sacrificed bull. Teddy's crusade is the bull-bloody, misguided, doomed. What emerges isn't revolution, it's documentation, tiny pockets of resistant knowledge. The young researcher who visits him at the end doesn't promise change, she promises record keeping. She's not plotting a rebellion, she's building an archive. For a traditional thriller, that would be an insultingly meager payoff. For Bugonia, it's the only honest one. This gets at the film's sharpest thematic blade. Truth and power do not naturally align. Teddy's journey moves from ignorant powerlessness before he wakes up to informed powerlessness, after he knows, to institutionalized powerlessness, prison. At each stage, the more accurate his picture of reality becomes, the less capacity he has to affect it. The movie suggests that, within certain late capitalist structures, truth is less a weapon than a liability. Once you see how harm is laundered through legality, PR, and acceptable risk, you either compartmentalize and go back to work or you break. Michelle, by contrast, embodies the fusion of truth and power, but only because she's on the side that sets the terms. Whether you read her as literally alien or as a stylized CEO with an inhuman worldview, she understands the system intimately and moves within it effortlessly. Her alienness, once confirmed, doesn't change her methods, it simply explains their chilling efficiency. She doesn't need secret labs or ray guns. She has regulatory capture, marketing teams, trial consent forms, and a board that applauds her for courage under fire. The invasion doesn't look like spaceships, it looks like investor calls. That's the sick genius of the film's big reveal. Learning Michelle is alien doesn't reframe her as a wild, fantastical threat, it reframes humans. If this is what it takes to steer our systems, to treat mass suffering as a reasonable trade off for incremental progress, maybe Alien is just a metaphor for the level of detachment we've normalized at the top. The movie uses literal extraterrestrials to say something poisonous about us. From high enough up the ladder, we already behave like a species observing another, harvesting it in the name of optimization. Lanthimos also takes aim at the stories we tell about heroes who see through the lies. Teddy is a tragic deconstruction of the conspiracy protagonist. He has the wall of clippings, the data, the righteous anger. We've been trained by decades of genre storytelling to expect that this guy, however unhinged, will eventually be vindicated in some way that matters. Bugonia gives him the one thing genre usually withholds, objective confirmation, and then shows how useless that confirmation is. He gets the footage, he gets the pattern, he never gets the leverage. The film's cruelty is to point out that the same platforms that can radicalize someone like Teddy forums, fringe sites, weaponized research are also expert at neutralizing him once he crosses legal lines. The moment his pain turns into a crime, everything he's uncovered becomes retroactively contaminated. Any true thing he's found is now evidence only of his instability. The system has a built-in defense. If you respond to structural harm with individual violence, you become the story, and the structure stays untouched. Where does that leave us? Bugonia hints at three terribly unsatisfying, deeply honest options. You can be Michelle, understand the game, play it, thrive, accept or ignore the cost. You can be Teddy, see enough to be horrified, act alone, destroy your life, change nothing structural. Or you can be the researcher, understand you're outmatched, refuse the fantasy of saving the world, and decide that preserving uncorrupted accounts of what happened still matters. Those choices map uncomfortably well onto real life. Most people end up closer to Michelle than they'd like to admit, making compromises inside systems that harm others at a distance. A smaller number go Teddy's route, turning trauma into grand unified theories and occasionally into violence. An even smaller group labors in the background, cataloging, studying, archiving, with no guarantee their work will ever be used. The bees, finally, are Bugonia's bleakest metaphor and its faintest glimmer of something beyond despair. They survive Teddy, survive the farm's abandonment, adapt their hives into something new. The last shots imply that intelligence or agency has shifted there, or that it was always there and we just never looked closely. Life continues, but not necessarily human life. Nature reconfigures itself around the damage. From the carcass of our species' self-destructive systems, something else will arise, whether we witness it or not. In most invasion stories, the core hope is that humans find a way to win, or at least to die meaningfully. Bugonia suggests a more humbling outcome. We might simply be an intermediate host. The victory, such as it is, belongs to whatever comes after us. The bees, the inheriting species, the next intelligence to study our ruins and write a cold report about how effectively we undermined ourselves. That's the final sting. The film doesn't ask, can we stop them? It asks, given who we are and how we've arranged our world, why would we ever be able to? And it answers in images instead of speeches. A CEO on a stage, applauded for promising to transform humanity. A man in a cell who was right too late. A file labeled with an ancient word for life from death. A hive humming calmly over an empty farmhouse. No speeches about hope, no rallying cry, just a quiet, unnerving suggestion if the way we live makes an alien conquest easier. Maybe the scariest part isn't the aliens, it's us. Let's start with the beekeeping itself, because Teddy's relationship with his hives isn't just colorful backstory, it's the film's most sophisticated metaphor system, operating on biological, philosophical, and economic levels simultaneously. Beekeeping requires understanding collective intelligence. A single bee is instinct driven, expendable. The hive is something else entirely. Emergent problem, solving, distributed decision making, selfless sacrifice for species survival. Teddy talks to his bees like individuals but tends to them as superorganism. That's not quirkiness, that's foreshadowing. Consider what Michelle's species actually does. They don't arrive with death rays. They infiltrate existing power structures, optimize them ruthlessly, accelerate human self-destruction through perfected incentive alignment. That's exactly what a superorganism would do, co-opt the host's own biology against it. When Michelle cancels the problematic drug trial, establishes the foundation, testifies before Congress, She's not showing mercy. She's pruning, removing a vulnerability that could trigger premature human resistance. Expert colony management. The film gives us one overt beekeeping scene early on. Teddy harvesting honey with almost religious care. He explains to Dawn that commercial beekeepers practice mite control, chemical treatments killing parasitic varroa, mites that devastate hives. But Teddy refuses. They adapt, he says. They adapt, he says. Kill the mites. The bees get weaker next generation. Let nature work it out. It's the exact opposite of pharmaceutical logic. Let the colony face evolutionary pressure rather than suppress symptoms. Yet Bugonia's irony is that Teddy's own logic mirrors Michel's alien methodology. Expose the system to stress. Let weaker elements fail. Strengthen what's adaptive. Watch that honey harvesting scene again. Teddy wears the full suit, not for protection exactly, but respect. He moves slowly, predictably. Bees don't swarm him because he doesn't threaten the hive's integrity. Contrast with how Mitchell moves through boardrooms. Same deliberate calm, same peripheral awareness of the collective she is managing. Both are tenders of superorganisms. Both understand individual sacrifice serves species strategy. The difference? Teddy anthropomorphizes his bees, projects individual consciousness onto collective behavior. Michel knows better. This leads to Bugonia's most subversive economic critique, hiding inside bee biology. Commercial honey production in America generates 300 million annually, but 60% of managed colonies die every winter. Beekeepers struck hives cross-country for pollination contracts. Almond orchards in California, apples in Michigan, stressing colonies beyond natural limits. The industry survives through replacement, not sustainability. Sound familiar? Pharmaceutical capitalism operates identically. FDA approvals function like pollination contracts, short-term profit overriding long-term biological stability. Michel's species simply perfects the model, removes inefficiencies like conscience or regulation. Teddy's refusal of mite treatment becomes quietly heroic in this reading. He is the holdout organic farm in a system of monoculture death. But the film undercuts even this. Abandoned after his arrest, Teddy's apiary shouldn't survive. Yet the final scene shows thriving, evolved hives. Nature doesn't need the ethical beekeeper. Sometimes it needs his absence. Brutal. Now let's dissect the DMT sequence more surgically, because that 20-minute set piece contains Bugonia's complete philosophy of perception, compressed into hallucinatory form. Lanthimos stages 4 simultaneous but distinct trips, each revealing character through warped subjective reality. But pay attention to the sound design across perspectives. It's where the real thematic payload lands. Teddy's trip voices multiply. Michel's flat denials become choral, dozens of identical voices speaking in perfect unison. It's confirmation of his core fear, not just one alien, but coordinated infiltration at civilizational scale. The sound suggests Michel isn't individual consciousness, but distributed intelligence speaking through human host. Textbook superorganism communication. Casey's trip, her own voice dominates. Internal monologue turned external accuser. You watched kidnapping. You did drugs with terrorists. Your byline will read co-conspirator. Journalistic ethics made literal. The story she should write indicts her first. Most devastating, distant sirens that never arrive. She hears rescue that won't come because she didn't call it. Dawn strip, sound muffles completely, then resolves into individual frequencies. Each person's heartbeat isolated, breathing patterns tracked, blood flow whooshing like ocean surf. He experiences mammalian biology as machine, wetware engineering rather than mystical essence. No soul detectable, just meat systems. His literalism encounters its limit. If humans are just biology, aliens could be too. No difference at cellular level. Michelle Strip, silence. Absolute, perfect silence. No internal monologue, no bodily noise, no ambient distortion. She experiences DMT exactly as neurochemistry, a temporary receptor flood she observes without participation. The absence of subjective distortion confirms objectivity. She sees reality while others hallucinate. But here's the genius twist. The silence isn't peaceful. It's predatory, like a predator gone still, waiting for prey to exhaust itself thrashing. Crosscut these 4 realities, and you get Bugonia's epistemology. Perception serves prior commitment. Teddy hears his conspiracy validated because he needs cosmic explanation for personal grief. Casey hears professional annihilation because she betrayed ethics. Don hears biological machinery because that's how his brain categorizes. Michelle hears nothing because she is outside human perceptual limits. Nobody experiences truth. Everyone experiences confirmation. This pattern repeats structurally. Early basement scenes establish neutral reality through wide master shots, observational, uncommitted. But as captivity extends, scenes increasingly adopt character POV. Teddy's interrogations get tighter framing, warmer lighting matching his growing certainty. Michelle's moments alone use colder blues, wider lenses emphasizing isolation. Dawn's scenes soften, focus on faces, emphasize hands and gestures. Casey gets handheld shots, unstable framing matching professional vertigo. Reality splinters because observation biases outcome. Bugonia literalizes quantum observer effect. What you look for determines what you see. But unlike physics, there's no baseline measurement, no objective camera free of commitment. Even neutral, wide shots were chosen by Lanthimos, Ryan, Mavropsarides, craftsmanship masquerading as objectivity. Let's talk class warfare, because Bugonia encodes sophisticated economic analysis into character design. Michelle's wardrobe evolution tells the story. Pre-abduction, tailored red power suit, symbolizing corporate violence made feminine. Post-release, softer palettes, muted earth tones signaling trauma survivor while maintaining silhouette authority. The costume designer, not credited in major reviews, suggesting Lanthimos regulars uses fabric weight strategically heavier weaves for control, lighter ones post captivity suggesting vulnerability without sacrificing presence. Teddy's beekeeping suit becomes his only professional attire. White protective fabric contrasts his increasingly disheveled civilian clothes. The suit suggests failed aspirational whiteness, clean, orderly, authoritative. But function betrays form, designed to protect keeper from hive, not integrate with it. He remains outsider even to nature. He claims stewardship over. Dawn wears the same three t-shirts throughout, rotating laundry style. No character growth through wardrobe because his worldview stays constant, literal, practical, familial. Class marker, Walmart basics that fit perfectly because he buys his size. Unlike Teddy's ill-fitting respectable clothes bought on credit. Hospital staff wear identical scrubs, green institutional fabric erasing individuality, dare the actual power, mediating life-death through mundane competence. No costume evolution because their function stays constant, maintains system equilibrium. When Teddy euthanizes Sandy, scrubs remain pristine. Bloodstains would humanize them. Cleanliness signals systemic absorption of individual tragedy. Courtroom suits the most sophisticated class coding. Prosecutors, slim navy, modern cuts signaling competence. Teddy's public defender, shiny discount fabric, slightly wrinkled, signaling overwork. Michelle testifying, custom grey with subtle jewelry, wealth visible but tasteful, trauma incorporated into power styling. Judge, black robes, erasing class entirely, symbolizing legal systems, theoretical neutrality, lie. This wardrobe calculus reveals Bugonia's core economic insight. Class isn't money alone, but legibility within power structures. Michelle's alienness grants perfect legibility. She intuitively dresses for every context. Teddy's human earnestness makes him permanently legible as threat. Dawn's working class consistency renders him legible as dupe. The system's real violence isn't extraction, it's categorization. Now the screenplay, Will Tracy's adaptation of Jang Joon-Haven's Save the Green Planet, deserves its own deep dive. Tracy Succession, the menu understands institutional evil not as mustache-twirling villainy but distributed responsibility. Nobody in Bugonia is cartoonishly evil. Michelle kills through policy, Teddy through conviction, Dawn through loyalty, Casey through silence. The alien conspiracy works precisely because every human participant regards their role as reasonable, limited, ethical within parameters. Tracy's biggest structural innovation, time dilation. The basement days feel eternal, 40 runtime minutes for 3 subjective days. Hospital visit compresses, 5 minutes for maximum consequence. Trial montage flashes by 2 minutes covering months. Michelle's post-victory ascent happens off-screen, implied through headlines. Time bends to power gradient. Michelle experiences institutional time, accelerating. Teddy carceral time, suspended. Dawn procedural time, contracted for plea efficiency. Dialogue deploys weaponized banality. Nobody screams. Nobody monologues. Critical exchanges use corporate euphemism, legal precision, familiar reassurance. When Michelle justifies clinical casualties. Statistically acceptable for phase 2. It lands harder than any alien reveal because it's verbatim FDA language. When Teddy says, "We can't be wrong because if we are wrong, I've done something unforgivable," it's pure psychological realism, not movie speechifying. Tracy embeds cultural specificity without exoticizing. References to actual pharma scandals, Purdue opioids, Vioxx withdrawals, Zantac carcinogens, ground conspiracy in verifiable malfeasance. Teddy's evidence wall includes real court documents alongside UFO photos, blurring genuine corporate crime with unverifiable cosmic crime. The screenplay never clarifies which documents are real because both undermine Michelle equally. Truth category collapses. Production design by James Price, Lanthimos regular, weaponizes space as character. Basement isn't gothic dungeon. It's functional root cellar with Teddy's research pinned everywhere. Plastic sheeting, concrete floor, single work lamp, illuminate conspiracy wall like evidence locker. No torture porn aesthetics, because real horror is bureaucratic. Spreadsheet of human cost pinned next to alien anatomy sketch. Farmhouse kitchen becomes surreal dinner party venue. Same table hosts family meals, alien interrogation, Casey visit. Continuity denies compartmentalization. Your breakfast table hosts felony. Hospital rooms, medical equipment mirrors basement chains. Tubes restrain Sandy like Michelle's zip tees restrain agency. Corporate office glass walls reflect distorted cityscape, suggesting Michelle's disconnection from humanity she oversees. Price hides alien semiotics everywhere. Basement pipe configurations accidentally form Andromedan glyphs, visible slowed down. Honey jars refract light into non-spectral colors. Sandy's monitor readouts display impossible vital combinations, never obvious enough for conscious notice, always present subconsciously. Environmental gaslighting. The researcher in the mid-credits scene carries biggest payload. She's not savior, she's archivist. Her file, the Bugonia protocol, suggests others reached same conclusion independently, not movement network. Her pitch to Teddy, documenting truth we can't prove. Archival resistance, not sexy, not cinematic. Real. This circles Bugonia's ultimate provocation. Maybe individual heroism was always lie. Maybe meaningful resistance was always boring. Filing FIRs, preserving documents, building exit notes, maintaining ledgers nobody reads. Maybe Teddy failed not through personal moral failure but structural impossibility. One man versus regulatory state plus alien superintelligence equals predetermined arithmetic. Film ends suggesting researcher succeeds where Teddy failed, not through exposure, through replication. Her network grows quietly. No trials, no TED Talks, no hashtags, just ledgers multiplying. If Michelle's species perfects extraction, human resistance perfects redundancy. Copy truth enough places, some version survives.